everybody, welcome to the show around the city, the state, the country and the world, wherever you happen to be watching the broadcast or posting on Facebook, or you're listening to it on a podcast. Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. Pete's with me, and we're very glad that you are as well. Happy birthday before we get into the news and the events of the day. Wedding anniversary or day of celebration that it might be at your place. It's March the 16th, 2022. That's 1 year ago, this very day, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the US Congress remotely and again pleads for further aid against the Russian invasion. And I don't know if you saw the stuff, I know Pete did, this morning, where the latest conscripts that the Russians are throwing into this stupid war. They've gone through all the convicted criminals and rapists, prisoners. I'm sure they were fighting with their heart in it. And they're now conscripting, if that's the word, people in their 60s. I wish the United Nations, which is charged with the responsibility to do something about this kind of thing, I wish they would speak up. I wish I had heard them say something condemning what the Russians were doing. But the United Nations, as I've said to you, is a joke. You've got China and Russia with permanent places on the Security Council and the right of veto. So what's the point? What's the point? They're hardly likely to be critical of themselves, are they? Jerry Lewis, American comedian, Martin and Lewis, and probably more famous in later years for all that work that he did with the telethon, where they raised hundreds of millions of dollars for charity. And I think towards the end, he died 2017, towards the end he did make it up with Dean Martin before, because Dean has been dead for quite some time. Anyway, he was born this day, Jerry Lewis, in 1926. Oscar-winning entertainer Liza Minnelli gets married. She was 56 and he was 48. Married a guy called David Guest. 2002 was the year, and New York City was where they tied the knot. The first performance of the new Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. When I say the new Grand Ole Opry, Pete, the Grand Ole Opry must have been going since the 1920s.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
I think since, well, radio began in the early 1920s, but the Grand Ole Opry was an institution even before that. But then they broadcast it to the nation. A wonderful tradition, the Grand Ole Opry. First performance of the new one, anyway, in 1974 on this day. Charles Darwin aboard HMS Beagle anchors in the recently British-acquired Falkland Islands for the first time in 1834. The New York Stock Exchange, slowest day ever. But that was back in 1830. Slow because there were only 31 shares that were traded. Now, of course, it's done not with people with chalk, but electronically. And boy, can that get out of hand. And with all the jitters on the American financial scene at the moment, people will be watching the stock market there today, and here, for that matter. Talk to you more about that in a minute. Gemini 8 launched with Neil Armstrong and David R. Scott aboard. Conducts the first docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit. The flight is aborted after a critical system failure, and the crew returned safely to Earth. This day, 1966. And Robert F. Kennedy announces he's going to run for the office of president. He launches his presidential campaign. 1968. I see that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I talked to him fairly, when I say recently, when I was on AA, He's very involved in the ecology, things environmental. He's got a problem with his voice. Something happened, don't know what. But he still has that Kennedy charisma. Robert Kennedy, of course, his father, Robert Kennedy Jr. I'm talking about, he has announced he's going to run in the upcoming next presidential election in America. That'll be interesting. That will be interesting. And oh yes, Scotland Yard was launched. It was London in 1830. The police reorganised themselves and set up Scotland Yard. Happy birthday. I think people still call them bobbies in England, don't they? We have a beautiful day here today. Just lovely, lovely time of the year. And I saw that we are moving out of an oscillation. And Pete, I can never remember which is which. We're coming out of a La Nina, and we're going into a
El something, El Nino.
El Nino. It doesn't matter. The one we've been through brings a lot of rain and cooler temperatures, and we're oscillating out of that, and we're moving into this new one, which is hot and dry, which it'll be for the next, I don't know, whatever the cycle is, 2 years, something like that. Everyone complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. I just think when you got a nice day like today, celebrate it, enjoy it. Atomic subs. Who says they're worth that kind of money? It's an eye-watering amount of money we're talking about. But apart from obsolescence, technology will be developed. You know, I've talked to people who say they're involved in companies that are working on that very thing even as we speak. There will be technology that'll locate and destroy submarines underwater, submerged, which of course is their big advantage, particularly the atomic submarines, because they don't have to surface to recharge their batteries. I don't know. Technology you can count on moving very quickly. And if they say it's going to cost, the figures are moving all the time. 360 billion. I think it was only yesterday I heard 200 billion. Now it's 360 billion. And you can bet that that will blow out. You can double that with a degree of confidence. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying that this whole deal needs scrutiny, transparency, and accountability, and it would be wise to put someone in charge of keeping his or her eye on the expenditure and increasing costs, and have the people who are sending us the bills justify those increasing costs. And in just the last 24 hours, I see that China has been most critical of Australia over this whole deal. For Australia having the temerity to want to provide for the security of the nation, yet they can have the most aggressive approach to their neighbours. They can have the biggest navy in the world. They can have, what do they call it, the wall of steel, largest standing army, I would think, in the world. But they're critical of little old Australia doing the responsible thing and protecting its sovereignty. Strange, strange, strange. Banks and banking will be in the news, I fear, for a few days, and for all the wrong reasons. Banks and banking run on trust. It's simple as that. Trust. That trust is being given a bit of a shaking at the moment, with 4 American banks going under. It's good to point out that the banks in Australia are very different. And thank God they're very different. Our system is much more secure. Sometimes when we have had a bank refuse an application for a loan, we're most upset. Miffed. Miffed. Well, in this country, the truth is you almost have to prove to the bank that you don't need the loan in order to get it. I know it's odd, but when banks start taking risks, well, I, for one, get rather nervous. We've been through it here in South Australia with the State Bank, and I think the State Bank in Victoria had a similar period of uncertainty, well, not uncertainty, disaster, where they simply got entrepreneurial. No. It's risky lending that causes the trouble. Simple as that. We've got a very different and stronger regulatory system. So in Australia, we are safe, or safer. And you can see the jitters on the American stock market. I think our market here, what was the figure I saw? Yesterday they were reporting losses of $30 billion for no reason. I mean, those companies were worth the same in the afternoon as they were in the morning, except people panicked, got nervous. Don't. Just keep cool. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, in truth. The electricity regulator has now joined in. I was talking to you about Origin yesterday, predicting a 20% hike in the cost of electricity. Well, now the regulator says the cost of electricity will go up 20, 25, and in the case of Victoria, 30%. Is somebody apart from us in the court of public opinion going to ask why? But hang on, didn't this government say that renewables would be cheaper? Anyone going to mention that? Again, I say it is crazy for the most energy-rich country in the world to be paying these sort of prices for electricity with no explanation. Oh, and don't mention the war. No. And if they do mention the war, just ask to the journalists of this country, just ask, sir, I'm sorry, what has the war in Ukraine got to do with what you have done to our electricity costs through your demonising of coal and gas? I certainly talked about this before, and I'm glad to see that the Firefighters Union is being most outspoken about the dangers of electric cars. Their warnings over the past few days are quite chilling. The possibility of uncontrollable fires in underground car parks in apartment buildings, and of course don't forget shopping centres and supermarkets. These risks have to be addressed, but at the moment they're being totally ignored. I guess simply because they've got to go into the too hard basket. It is too hard to even think about it. If the battery in an electric car should catch fire, it takes in excess, this guy from the union was saying, it takes in excess of 30,000 litres to quell the fire. If a conventional car catches fire, the brigade to put it out have pour on something like 1,400 litres. Now, the water that comes from putting out an electric car fire is contaminated, so getting rid of it in a car park or an apartment building is no easy feat. Also, there is a worry about contamination of the firefighters personally. None of this is being addressed in this fashionable, idealistic pursuit of electric vehicles. And just because they're not easy problems to solve, it doesn't mean that we can ignore them. I mentioned to you the other day, and obliquely this morning, the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank. second biggest bank in America. It's interesting to look at some of the corporate failures. It's not a particularly cheery thing to do, but it is interesting because from some of these we can learn if we have half a brain. Corporate failures. There does seem to be a pattern too. Have a think about all those successful companies bought by venture capitalists, or, oh, I don't know what you'd call them, corporate raiders. And of course there's just good old-fashioned bad management. Mind you, old-fashioned. Bad management usually comes with new fashion rather than old fashion. It's hard to find out where the trouble actually begins, but have a look at this list that I have got in front of me here. Dick Smith Electronics, for example. Dick Smith's was hugely successful. It was bought by Woolworths. I think they paid $20 million back when capital gains were tax-free. $20 million. And they didn't know what to do with it. And it's been passed around like a parcel at a children's party. I can't tell you who owns it now, but it's not a happy story. David Jones, I saw the other day, once this amazing department store chain sold, I think, to the South African Woolworths company for over $2 billion, changed hands the other day for $200 million, the whole thing, including real estate. Scotch Transport, Kodak, Nokia, Xerox, Commodore Computers. And what about the great big IBM? Do you ever hear about IBM anymore? Ansett, Laura Ashley, Angus and Robertson Booksellers, Hitachi. Philips is an amazing story. Philips were responsible for just about every innovation in electronics that you or I could think of. The compact disc, the DVD, television, colour television, everything, honestly. And do you know what they do today? They have gone from the biggest electronics producer and innovator. All they do now is razors, electric razors, and electric toothbrushes. Oh, you'll see the Philips name, but they have sold it off. Everything is owned by China or India. AWA, there's another sad story for Australia. Toshiba, Motorola, Tandy, and whatever happened to the big Australian, BHP? Umpteen Airlines, Pan Am. Do you remember Impulse Airlines and Butler Airways? I do. Toys R Us, Hills Industries, a wonderful South Australian company. I remember when the shares were $7, famous for more than the Hills hoist. You know what the shares are today? 7 cents. It seems to me that success is very fragile and sometimes boils down to one man or one woman. Change anything in the formula. Somebody comes in, maybe buys a radio station, a trucking company, a department store. He wants to put his stamp on things. And then, of course, the company loses its way, and, of course, all its good people. I wonder if we'll ever learn. Have I got time? You would have heard, as I have heard, God, I hate it. You can't say that. Or sometimes they say, oh, you can't say that today. I wonder who this they is. Pete, do you ever wonder?
Yes, I do.
Who is they? They must be very influential. Who is they to tell us what we can say and can't say? And why are we so compliant? Why do we go along with it? Why do we not? Oh, yes, okay, I won't say that. No. Just because some anonymous person or group tells us what we can say, the next step, of course, is they will be telling us what we can think. And just because they say you can't say that, it does not mean that we have to obey. They can tut-tut all they like, but we don't have to go along with it. Thank you so much for viewing the Court of Public Opinion, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back to round up the week tomorrow. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Peter Clayton is behind the camera, and we'll talk soon. Believe in yourself, and goodbye for now.